I will give a little bit background of your Nick. All right.
Okay.
All right. So my name is Abdul Muhammad. Welcome to Triangle InfoSeCon. Today's talk is going to be on Supercharge your defense strategies. We have a Nick Sweet. He's a current VP of Solutions and Architecture at Avertium. Nick is CISSP with over 10 years of experience in public and private sector. Cybersecurity and risk management his expertise includes cyber operations, security process troubleshooting, technological process improvements, technical security assessment, threat intelligence, penetration testing, incident response, project management, security system analysis and planning, and client relations management. We encourage attendees to visit the speaker in the virtual launch on the platform. I will turn it over to the Nick. Enjoy the session.
No, thank you. So appreciate everybody joining today. So I know a lot of other sessions going on, so I definitely appreciate you all, jumping in here. And I know this is going to be a quick session, right? So we'll probably save the questions towards the end. So as we're going through, though, please feel free to go into chat and QA. That way that those things are ready to be answered towards the end. But we'll go ahead and get started. So quick introduction, right? So we already went through that, so we'll have to spend a lot of time here. But yeah, I'm Nick Sweet. I lead our solutions architecture team at Avertium. I come actually from a very diverse background between pen testing, security operations centers, development. So a lot of years in this space when it comes to both offensive and defensive security. So, when we were kind of thinking, from our perspective of what do we want to present on today, right? When you only have, 25, 30 minutes to get a topic, it was really how can we, help, organizations that are out there trying to get an understanding of, are we doing the things that we're supposed to be doing when it comes to our defensive strategies? And so hopefully here over the next, 15, 20 minutes, it'll be quick, but hopefully it'll be concise and hopefully you learn something. And the key thing is to hopefully give you a roadmap that you all can use internally to kind of look at, what are we doing internally and what can we be doing better for the future when it comes to detection and all of the things that goes into building a really good security operations and blue team practice. So jumping in, right, so I think for anything, right, is if we're looking to assess or try to get an understanding of where we're at when it comes to, security operations is, we need to have some way to measure ourselves, right, and have some way to be able to rank that. And instead of us coming up with just some crazy proprietary ranking system, is we wanted to kind of keep it simple for today's conversations. And this is some of the things that we do internally here at Avertium when we're building our security operations centers, but more in a kind of a simplified method. And we used a lot of the frameworks that are out there today that a lot of organizations are probably familiar with. And I'm sure if you've been in IT and security for a while, you're probably familiar with the capability maturity model. And that was one of the key things, right? Is let's use terms, let's use frameworks that people are familiar with. So when you're going and talking within your organization, it's not that you have to go relearn a lot of other things. So this will be what our main agenda is for today, is just some things that you all should be thinking about when you're, analyzing, are you all doing the right things within your all's security monitoring capabilities? So the first thing we'll start with, right, is what are the initial things that you all need to be doing? And I think that's the key, and I think back, I always like relating things back to stories. And, back we were talking, I think before everybody joined is, I spent a lot of time in the military. And, one of the first things that, you learn when you're in the military is around, land navigation, right? And what happens if you get lost out in the middle of the woods and you're trying to figure out where you're going? And, so the first thing that you have to do, right, is first off, you got to figure out where you're at, so you might have a map or whatever, and you have to figure out, okay, where on this map am I? And you need to make sure that you have that right map so that you're going in the right direction. And so that's kind of what the initial phase is for us. And I won't go into a lot of details, around in depth around what these particular frameworks and what I'm deeming as maps here. You guys can definitely do your own research and you might actually be familiar with these. But, first starting off when you're trying to build a program is you need to understand, you have to have some type of playbook, some type of map that allows you to measure yourself against or move towards to some goal in the future. So one of the things that we recommend with our customers and things that we do internally is we leverage the NIST CSF maturity model. And it does a really good job of simplifying all of the things that you can do and gives you a way to assess your organization from that high level strategic perspective. The next piece of this, right, is the NIST CSF is really good at providing you that program level information, but you still need to have a way to be able to help your organization at the tactical level. So, and one of the major frameworks that I'm sure that y'all have seen, if you follow any of the major Twitter, security leaders, or if you've been in the space for a little bit, is a lot of the work that MITRE does around the defensive space. One of our favorites is the MITRE attack framework. And if you're not familiar with it, basically what it is just this huge knowledge base around all of the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that our adversaries like to perform against organizations to meet their goal, right? So they have a certain set of steps, they have certain things, in quotation marks, those techniques that they do to try to get into customers' networks. And then Shield is another one that was just recently released. I kind of left this in here just in case people hadn't seen this release, but it's this new strategy around active defense mechanisms. And this is something that was released here just in the past couple of months. So if you haven't had a chance to see the Shield project, that would be another good one for y'all to look at. And the two key things about this, right, is now this establishes that initial baseline and framework for you guys to start assessing your organization against. So thinking back, right, to that CMMM model that had the initial managed and going forward is now this allows us to establish what are the initial things that we should be doing. And then moving into that, right, we have to have the ability to manage all of those things, right? So it's great that we have this program level framework from the maturity model. And it's great that we have the MITRE attack at the tactical level, but we have to put some structure around that and be able to put those pieces together and marry them so they kind of work as one framework together. So one of the things that we use internally at Avertium is what you're seeing here is this concept around content packages. So that instead of just having alerts in a SIM somewhere or in some type of monitoring tool that you might have, but you actually have a holistic picture in what is your ability to help protect against the actual techniques that the bad guys will use against you. So by taking the very specific techniques and applying the NIST CSF functional areas around identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, you now have a full holistic picture on how your organization is actually protected against the things that the bad guys are doing. So, for example, right, if you're a full Windows shop and you're, going through all of the different techniques, there's hundreds of those out there. If you're full Windows, you might not need to worry about the Linux techniques that'll come in and try to, exploit your environment. So why even focus your time there? And I think we would all agree that in a perfect world, we could actually protect against those, right? So why sit around and wait for your SOC to try to find something based on some rule set or alarms that are within the SIM? Is how do we protect against it? Are there preventative measures that we can put in place to say, hey, do we have the appropriate EDR tool? Do we have MFA on our remote access points? Do we have MFA on our O365 or our G Suite so that people can't sign into those and get us with a business email compromise attack? And then once you establish that, then you can start moving into those detection strategies. And then more than just sitting around and waiting for detections to happen, it's, hey, can we come up with other creative ways of detecting? Is that deploying a honeypot in a DMZ somewhere? Is that, coming in and doing some honey credentials or honey users to help us protect against a password spray attack? All of those will really help you mature your organization over time. And then finally, being able to respond and recover some of the more important steps that I think a lot of organizations maybe don't actually get the time to get around to. And the key things of that, right, is what we don't want to happen is you spend a lot of time building these, strong protection mechanisms and these awesome detections, but then when something happens, no one knows what to do, right? And we see this all the time when we're working with our customers is, hey, we found this, pen tester, or we found this bad guy, or that EDR found that ransomware that was about to propagate, but then they didn't know how to respond or respond quickly. And what ends up happening is, and especially in like a ransomware or some of those instances, those things can spread really quickly. And if you haven't done the appropriate testing or the appropriate training internally, something that could have been a win for the organization that says, hey, we did a good job of detecting and stopping this, turns into a black eye for a lot of security organizations because, we didn't act quickly enough to be able to get that out. And that's why we think it's very important to really focus on that respond and recovery steps. So moving forward, moving it past that next step, right? If we think about progression now, so we talked about initially, just getting something in there. What things should we be looking at to help build our, our security detection strategy? And then we moved into kind of how do we actually move into, and I think we have a good question here in a second. I'll be able to answer that towards the end. And then now it's how do we define that, right? So there has to be a way to actually define and move that past the reactive approach. So as you start to mature this organization and you actually start, kind of building this program out, you want to take it that next step further, right? You have the appropriate frameworks in place, you've married them together, and now you want to start moving to a more proactive approach. And this is where threat hunting comes in. So threat hunting is a good way for your organization to really get in there and find things before they happen. And as you're able to do this, you'll start seeing a huge benefit to a lot of the security investments that you've put in place. And this is a very high level process. And, I won't go into a lot of detail since today's not necessarily a threat hunt conversation. One of the key things, though, that I will bring up here, though, is really around, like what to look for. The two key things, right, is collecting the data, because you can't do a threat hunt unless you have some type of data or a means to get the data. And then second, you need to be able to come up with creative hypothesis, right? The things you're going to look for to really make that hunt process effective. And the way we look at that at Avertium is we roll those into three main buckets. The first bucket is really around more kind of temporal or targeted type of intelligence. If you think about, here recently with Ruck and some of the ransomware that's hitting the healthcare industry, that's a more kind of targeted thing. It's like, hey, we see an active threat and they're using these TTPs to actually attack organizations. So what ends up happening there, right, is this gives us very relevant information and something that's really tailored and relevant to our customer organizations. And the same thing for you all. So when you're looking for threat intelligence, make sure you're looking for things that are really, for ATP groups or anybody that's targeting your vertical and what your organization is in the business of doing. The next piece of this is really around kind of the more generic, right? So we had talked about MITRE attack earlier. And if you're not familiar with it, right, it's just that knowledge base. So if you think about it, if it's just a knowledge base of things that someone could do, this is more that catch-all, right? Is regardless if it's an APT group, be it Fancy Bear or APT 32 or whoever your favorite group is, or if it's your local pen testing company that you hired to come in to see, hey, how's our network and how's our security doing? They're going to do X, Y, and Z. So with that, applying those more general practices, you're able to kind of cast a wider net for something that's maybe not necessarily specific to your vertical. And then finally, the one that we use a little bit, I guess, sparingly, is like IOC searching. And the reason we do that is really around this concept of the pyramid of pain. So if you think around IOCs, the reason we don't spend a lot of time just going out and searching and looking for those is because there's just millions of them. I think we'd all agree that there's, if you think about the latest threat feed, if you follow any open source ones, if you have paid ones, there's hundreds and thousands and millions of hashes and IP addresses that you could possibly be looking for within your environment. So what we have here that you'll see here is this concept of the pyramid of pain. And what this is meant to represent is how much pain do you actually inflict on an adversary when you put some type of security control in place. And what's really good about this, right, is if you think about this, is it really starts maximizing the time that you're spending within your security detection strategy. Is let's let the machines do what they're good at. So if you think about going back to the reason we don't focus a lot on IOCs, is just to be honest, the machines are better at it than we are. So if you can go in and put a hash value in a SIM or a EDR solution, it's just going to automatically tell you if that thing's there. Or if you're saying, hey, go in and detect this IP address and tell me if you ever see it. Well, if you're pulling in firewall logs or other endpoint logs and you see that IP address, the machine is going to be a lot quicker to tell us that, hey, we saw this. So let's let the machines do what they're good at and let us focus on the things that humans are. And that's where we move up to the top. And so when you're focusing on that, there's the reason that we talked about the APT groups and the MITRE attack is you should really be focusing in on the top end of this pyramid when you're building your threat hunting strategies. And by doing this, this is going to help you mature that security operations practice tremendously. Right. And now moving on, so finally here, kind of moving into the last two things, is we're starting getting into what we see as a lot, kind of the more mature organizations. And I think this kind of goes back into, the question that one of our attendees just asked around, how much, how big of a team do you need to apply this approach? A lot of the stuff that we've covered up to this point is stuff that you can do day in and day out. It's right. It's just how much do you want to scale it? What we see here is you start moving into more and more kind of the measurement piece. This is when you start moving into where you need maybe larger teams or a partner like an MSSP to come in and help you with this, because it really comes into like all of the like keeping all of the pieces together, all of the different techniques that the bad guys are using. There just comes a lot of economies of scale for someone to be able to do that on a larger scale. So if you think about this now, so as we move into the quantitatively managed phase, right, is where we have to now be able to assess and measure. And one of the things that we do internally around this is having kind of a heat map around all of the different TTPs that the adversaries are going to use. So on here on the right, this is just an example of kind of, initial access. So, within MITRE, you'll see when you get in there, it's mapped across all these different domains, and then you have the actual techniques here. So at the top, you have this tactic, right? It's like, hey, we need to get into the organization. So how do we get initial access? And down here in the column, you'll see, hey, there's a lot of ways for a bad guy to do that. It's either a drive-by compromise. They can do a phishing scam where they send an attachment or they send you a link to go click. But there's some way that the adversary is going to get into your network. And if we apply what we talked about earlier, right, if we think about the whole NIST CSF, then we can start measuring, how much of a risk is this to our organization? So we start with that identify step, right? So what's the initial risk to our organization? Does it even make sense, right? Going back to, hey, if we have Windows and no Linux systems, let's just get rid of that. So we establish what our initial risk score is, and then we start filling in the blanks. And then eventually, as we start measuring against each one of these techniques, you get a residual risk score that allows now your organization to now take that to the board, take that to your CFO, take that to your CISO, whoever that might be, and give a quick snapshot of, hey, I know we've done a lot of good work in investing in our security practice, but we definitely have a big gap in this particular area. And now this gives you metrics and stuff that you can go and really use a quantitative approach so that your executives can see what is the actual risk to the environment. And then over time, you can start mapping that overlay across all your organization and really build a more mature security practice within the organization. And then finally, from an optimizing standpoint, I know we're getting down here to the last 5 minutes. I just want to quickly jump into this concept around TT&E, and that's testing, training, and exercises. And this is where we see a lot of organizations going back to, the respond and recover pieces. A lot of people have awesome run books. People have great detections. They have the best SIMs. They have the best rule sets. They have everything money can buy. But people don't take the time to actually set and walk through what would happen in the case of, an event. And that's where we really suggest is if you're looking to really optimize and get yourself to that, that peak maturity within your security detection strategy, is really try to get to where you're doing exercises at least on an annual basis. And there's two exercises that we see as the most value. The incident response tabletop, right? This is going to be the one that's bringing in a lot of the business leads. This is going to bring in your communications, your legal, executives across the organization. So if an incident did happen, what all steps do we need to take to be able to do that? And then finally, the one that, is more at the tactical approach is just doing some purple team exercises. And if your organization is lucky enough to actually have the ability to, have a red team and a blue team, then this is something that you can do internally. Or you can actually work with, your trusted partners to come in and help you facilitate this. And really what the concept of this is, right, is let's step through a hypothetical scenario and let's map it through the entire kill chain, right? Let's take, from initial access, like what do we want to simulate? So maybe we send a spear phishing attack to a certain user in the environment, and we step through what is our ability to actually be able to capture if someone's phishing against us. Then we perform some type of execution. Maybe we have some drop or a piece of malware that drops on a machine somewhere, and just simulate that event. And then let's watch it as it goes through the sim and make sure that we have the right rules in place and the right logs to actually capture that, and really just simulate a full event across the organization. And then finally, in summary, I wanted to leave, just kind of quick, if you're trying to print something off, right, and you just needed that cheat sheet, to add to, your favorite saves folder is, when you're thinking about this, right, what are the things that I need to focus on with each one of these steps, right? So initially, start with the basics, right? Use those industry best practices, be it NIST CSF, be it MITRE TAC framework, maybe it's ISO, maybe it's HIPAA, whatever it is, make sure you're looking at that from a compliance standpoint. And then finally move into, managing it and making sure that you're pulling the strategic and tactical together, because they're truly going to feed off of each other. And then finally, define the things that you want to do to be able to get in there and proactively look for things within the organization and be more targeted around your approach instead of just sitting around waiting for the tools to do something. And then make sure you're also going in and doing that assessing and measuring on a continuous basis. And if you build a good program around this, this just turns into muscle memory, and it's just something that you do anytime you're creating new practices. And then finally, optimizing, making sure you're testing, training, and having exercises within your organization is really going to help you all mature your security practice internally. All right. And I know we have about 4 minutes left for questions and Q&A. So I will pause there and see if there's any questions. And I, appreciate everybody attending.
Awesome, Nick. Thanks. Is there any questions? We still have 4 minutes. So,
yeah, for tabletops, I tend to recommend, at least an annual basis, right? For us, it's one of those things to, we understand everybody has a lot of competing priorities. So what we usually recommend is do that annual workshop and turn it into, just that, a workshop, to where it's not just doing the exercise, but you also are updating some of the documentation. You're actually, trying to mature the process at the same time. And don't look at it as a chance to, get people within the organization, right? The key thing during an incident response tabletop is you never want, as a security practitioner, you never want to have the IT teams or someone else within the organization to feel like, the security team is out to get me. So make sure before you do those tabletop exercises that you have full buy-in from them, because the worst thing to do during a tabletop is to come out of that meeting with enemies, and you really want it to be a collaborative approach. No, thanks for the question.
any other questions? Yeah. Nick, I do have one question. Like, how often do you think we need to do the purple team exercising?
Yeah, purple teaming, and like I said, there's no one catch-all answer, right? For smaller organization, it's going to be tough to do it a lot because we all wear multiple hats in that case. But I do think if you roll it into a repeatable process, it takes a lot of that burden off of your team. So those purple team exercises, if it's one of those things where you could roll that into your incident response tabletop, you could do that as just one fell swoop, right? That way you're not trying to reschedule or try to get 2 events on the calendar, and you can, kind of really, facilitate some, just some time savings by just having those integrated together.
Got it. Thanks. Is there any questions? I think we are good. Thank you so much, Nick. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your team. And you guys have a good rest of the day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Hey, appreciate it. Hey, thanks everybody.
And, bye.